Let's look for how we can change our perception of feedback itself. And that means feedback is literally information that helps us to improve. One of the things that people always ask me is, how do I learn what it is that I've learned to do well? So how did I get better at some of the things that I've practiced and worked on? How have I begun the process of mastering those crafts? And the reality is that I got better at all of them by hunting for feedback. And I would look for feedback from people that I qualified in my own mind as being a good source of that feedback. I would avoid what I call the principle of false authority, which is when we position someone that should not have authority. So with that in mind, we need to hunt for feedback from the best possible sources. And this is what I call looking to win feedback. Welcome to the Changing Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and this is the podcast about thinking for a change. Each week, we'll explore behavioral science and how we can use it to take over the world. Improve our lives. Well, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. This is me, Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to be looking at how to take feedback from other people. Now, this is something that I know many people struggle with, and the reason why most of us can struggle with taking feedback is because it is so nice to think of an idea of us as perfect. And don't get me wrong, I think you're perfect, just the way you are. And I know there's people in my life that also believe that I'm perfect just the way I am. However, in believing that, they might also believe that they can help us by providing us with valuable feedback that allows us to be able to make the appropriate changes to our lives or to ourselves, which results in us having a happier and more successful existence. In other words, there's people that like to poke holes in everything that we do, or certain things that we do. And so the people that you're getting feedback from could be the people that are closest to you. It could be members of your family. It could be your partner. It could be your kids. It could be your parents. For a lot of people, they will always describe their parents as being a big source of feedback. But there's also feedback that we get in a professional setting. We get feedback from our bosses. We get feedback from our team members. We get feedback from the people who report to us sometimes, although that's a harder type of feedback to deliver. Therefore, we don't get it as often. But nonetheless, it's imperative as a skill, whether it's skill for life or a skill for your professional life. It's critical that you learn to be able to take feedback as effectively as possible. And so what I wanted to do in this session, listen to me talking to you as if I'm speaking about a session that we're doing, like you're in therapy with me. That's a terrible way to describe a podcast episode, which is obviously right up there as one of the most enjoyable parts of your week. Am I wrong? Well, please feel free to give me feedback. And if you can type up an email and just delete the email once you've typed it up. All the feedback you have, and then just delete it. See, that's not a very good way of taking feedback. Immediately, I'm telling you that I don't even want any. But if you do have feedback sincerely and you feel that it would make the podcast even better, please feel free to email me and let me know. It is important for me that this becomes as valuable to you and as fun to listen to as possible. And that is why I'm open for feedback. Now, you also get feedback online from trolls. And by trolls, I mean people who are delivering feedback with nefarious intentions in mind. I'm not 100% sure if I've used the word nefarious in the right way there. Nonetheless, malevolent, that's better. Malevolent. For malevolent reasons, sometimes people will deliver feedback to you. And their aim is not to help you improve or to empower you or to do any of that stuff. Instead, their desire is to see if they can bring you down a peg or two. And so what I want to do is talk about all types of feedback, when it's appropriate for us to listen to feedback and when it's not, so that you can ensure that you're a lot more effective at being able to take feedback in however it's meant, in the most useful and most valuable way. So first and foremost, let's talk about handling positive feedback, my favorite type of feedback. And this is when people tell you about something that you're doing and talk about how great you are. And so oftentimes when people give you positive feedback, it feels good, right? Doesn't it feel good when someone says, oh my goodness, oh, you are so good at this, or, oh, you look so great today. Or, oh, wow, I love how that shirt brings out your eyes. Oh, all those kind of nice things that people can say to us it makes us feel good. And so let's talk about handling positive feedback, because there is actually a poor way of handling positive feedback. And in many ways, the poor way that we often can have in terms of handling positive feedback is by ignoring the work of Professor Carol Dweck of Stanford University. Now, Professor Dweck, as many of you'll know, and we even did a podcast episode of this back in the day, on the growth mindset. And the growth mindset is what Professor Dweck shares as being the belief that people have about their ability to be able to improve and get better. And so what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to recognize how this growth mindset works, specifically in this case, when it comes to positive feedback. And so if someone delivers positive feedback to you, then it's really important that you avoid the tendency we sometimes have to fall into complacency. This means avoiding this tendency to accept, well, I've got the positive feedback, therefore I'm probably great at this, therefore I don't need to work anymore at this. And it stops us being diligent and vigilant in ensuring that we maintain the same standards as before. So someone says, oh, that was a great episode, Owen. And then I start to phone it in because I think to myself, oh, well, this is easy for me. I'm going to be great. I don't have to work on it. So instead of doing that, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to focus on specifically what the feedback was targeting. In other words, what's really great about positive feedback is we want to be able to ask the question, specifically, I'd love to know more in terms of how was this good? How is this valuable? Which parts of the episodes did you like the most? And by doing so, it provides me with the opportunity to be able to consistently execute in that way. In other words, I can keep on creating in that kind of manner. So I'll continue to be able to communicate, continue to be able to record the podcasts such that I'm maintaining a high standards, as opposed to generally just taking the confidence hit. Because one of the benefits to positive feedback is it does increase our confidence. It makes us feel good. And that's a good thing because confidence by itself can also be advantageous to our improvement. If you feel confident in something, that can end up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy because the confidence makes us feel good about ourselves. And as a result, we're more likely to fire on all cylinders whenever we're doing what it is that we need to be doing. And so what I guess I'm saying here is that by taking positive feedback in, and by then using that positive feedback in such a way that you're getting specific about it, it will allow you not only to benefit from the actual confidence that you get, but also provides you with a way of focusing in on specifically how you can continue to improve. And by doing so, it can allow you to start to build up some momentum. And as you build that momentum, it enables you, as you continue to go through, to consistently perform at the highest level possible, which is, of course, the aim. So the next time you get a bit of positive feedback, say thank you, smile, let them know that you're grateful for the feedback, and then ask them a question. I'd love to know more. Could you be specific about what you liked exactly? And some variation of that question should hopefully provide you with more really good information that you can then leverage moving forward to ensure that you keep at that high level. You ensure that you're building momentum and your aim is to continue to eclipse your own wonderful performance. So therein it lies the ability or the secret for you to handle positive feedback. Now that we've gotten the nice one out of the way, let's turn to the other type of feedback, which is constructive feedback. I'm going to give you some constructive feedback now. So what is constructive feedback? Well, it's kind of also known as negative feedback. In a nutshell, it's when someone gives you feedback about what you need to change, or someone gives you feedback about what you need to do differently. And the aim of calling it constructive is it's supposed to construct something for you. It's supposed to help you. And so with that in mind, let's understand why constructive or negative feedback can hurt us so much, why it stings, why we feel bad. Well, first of all, it's very easy to personalize constructive feedback. Someone says something, and it's very easy for us to think to ourselves, oh, this is about me, I'm no good, and immediately to start to make it so that it's something personal. Instead of seeing it as a behavior, we immediately connect it with our identity. We think to ourselves, oh, I'm no good. I'm not good at this. I knew I was no good at podcasting. I knew I was no good at doing videos. I knew this. I knew that. So immediately we tie whatever they've said into our identity. The second reason why feedback can sting is because oftentimes it leads us to catastrophizing, right? We start to catastrophize. We start to imagine, oh my goodness, they don't like this? What if nobody listens to me anymore? What if I lose all my listeners? What if everything goes wrong? We catastrophize, we blow things out of proportion. And as a result of that, it dents our confidence, it makes us more anxious, and the anxiety itself can, in turn, negatively impact our performance. We can also feel embarrassed. Third thing, so we can feel humiliated or embarrassed when we get feedback, particularly when we get constructive feedback in a public forum. When someone posts a comment on our post on social media or on YouTube, or when someone says something in a meeting in front of everybody, that can actually make us feel embarrassed. And we feel embarrassed, sometimes humiliated. And as a result of that, we can tighten up, and therefore we can avoid risking trying to perform again, avoid risking saying something out loud, avoid risking letting other people know what our thoughts are. And that's problematic itself. A fourth thing that can happen is we can feel disrespected. So we can feel like the person is disrespecting us, is looking down on us, is insulting us. And that in turn can make us angry. And the anger, remember, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to the dark side, in the words of Yoda. So, you don't want to end up as Darth Vader, do you? You don't want to end up on the dark side. You do not want to end up starting to have those negative thoughts and end up finding out that you've almost killed your son many years later and you chop off his hand, right? You don't want to be in that situation. No way you want to be like that. So in order to avoid that, we need to avoid feeling disrespected. Disrespect can lead to a lot of anger. So we need to make sure that we're avoiding that tendency to fall in. Now, sometimes you might be disrespected, but we'll talk about how to handle when people have negative reasons behind giving you feedback as well. And then also it's distrust. We might respond to negative feedback, and as a result of someone giving us this feedback, maybe we feel it was not coming from the right place. Maybe it was coming from the right place, but we still felt embarrassed. But as a result of that, we lose trust. We struggle with being vulnerable. We struggle with trusting. We struggle with being authentic in a group with others because we feel that whatever we do will be held against us in the conversations that we have with people. So it's critical for us to be able to be aware of that to the best of our own ability. Now, in order for us to be able to take feedback better, I want to share with you, like I always try to do, a little bit of the neuroscience behind failure, and specifically the neuroscience that allows us to understand what's most important when you get feedback. And so a lot of the research, what they found is that whenever we are given different forms of feedback, there's a number of neurochemicals that tend to be triggered or released in our brain as a result. The primary neurochemicals that seem to be released whenever we make a mistake or whenever we fail or whenever we get negative feedback about doing something wrong tend to be noradrenaline and cortisol, and sometimes dopamine as well. And so these chemicals tend to be released in the best possible way whenever we get constructive feedback that is specific. And it's important that this constructive feedback is specific, and I'll tell you why. In terms of what creates the release of these neurotransmitters, and in order for us to understand what triggers what we call neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to learn and make new connections in the brain, which again is facilitated by a lot of these neurotransmitters, what we have to understand is that there's, in order of the most useful type of feedback to promote this kind of neuroplasticity, you have 4 different types. The number one most useful type of feedback for your brain to learn is actually constructive feedback that's specific. The second most useful type of feedback you can get that is useful in terms of promoting neuroplasticity in your brain is positive feedback that's specific. Now notice what both of these have in common. Specificity allows us to be able to identify exactly what's going on. And so in that moment, it provides us with the information that we need in order for us to make the changes that we desire. The third type of feedback is positive feedback that's more general or more generic. Now, this is only beneficial because it boosts our confidence. And that confidence in turn can affect and positively impact our performance. The problem is because there's no specificity, we don't actually learn exactly what we need to do differently or exactly what we need to keep doing. Instead, we just get a boost of confidence, and that in turn, by proxy, can help improve our level of confidence and therefore performance. And so what we then need to understand is right down the bottom, something that really isn't that helpful. In fact, some would suggest it's counter helpful Is that a term? Counter helpful, counter useful? Yeah, something like that. Counter helpful, counter useful. So it's a nice way of putting it. I like it better than the alternatives, even though I can't think of the alternatives right now, but I prefer it that way. So what can be counter helpful or counter useful is negative or constructive feedback that is not specific. Because to a degree, you could even argue that feedback which is negative, that is not specific, is not even constructive, because it doesn't really help us. If someone says to me, Owen, you're a terrible communicator. Well, that doesn't help me. All it does is negatively impact my confidence, maybe. But if it does negatively impact my confidence, that will then affect my performance. But I won't know what to do differently. All I'll feel is bad about myself, which has never been shown to be effective in helping us improve. And just bringing this back to the growth mindset by Professor Carol Dweck, when we start to see our ability to be able to make changes and we stop, even from a positive or negative place, thinking to ourselves that it's something wrong with us, and instead we start to see it's something we're doing, then we can work on it. And by applying more effort and by learning specifics on what we need to work at, then it allows us to be able to improve and allows us to get better as a result of this. So in order to take what we've talked about, we've looked at why we don't like feedback. We've looked at positive feedback. We've looked at the various different things that happen in terms of the brain for feedback. What's the most useful way that we can think about feedback when we get it? Well, first of all, let's look for how we can change our perception of feedback itself. And that means seeing feedback as literally information that helps us to improve. And with that in mind, the key then is to hunt out feedback. One of the things that people always ask me is, how do I learn what it is that I've learned to do well? So how did I get better at some of the things that I've practiced and worked on? Things like hypnosis, for example, or NLP or public speaking. How have I begun the process of mastering those crafts? And the reality is that I got better at all of them by hunting for feedback. I would look and constantly look for anything I could, especially in the early days of learning, information that would help me to improve. What is it that I need to improve on? What is it that I need to tweak? What is it that I need to get better at? And I would look for feedback from people that I qualified in my own mind as being a good source of that feedback. I would avoid what I call the principle of false authority, which is when we position someone that should not have authority as having authority. In other words, we experience someone giving us feedback and this person should not really be qualified. They've no expertise or any sort of skill in that area. And as a result of that, we should not be taking their feedback as valid feedback per se. It doesn't mean it's not always valid feedback in terms of everyone's right to an opinion, but we should not hold an expert's opinion at the same level as someone who has no clue about a particular area. We should be exalting to a degree an expert's opinion, not again that they're right 100%, but if you hear from a number of experts, for instance, about what you need to improve on, that is going to be more valuable feedback than if you hear from people that don't necessarily know what it is that you're doing and don't really have a clue. So with that in mind, we need to hunt for feedback from the best possible sources. And this is what I call looking to win feedback. When you master the art of winning feedback, it means that you're seeing feedback, getting feedback as almost like a currency, because it really is a currency that you can use to invest in your future self. Whenever you are able to master the art of winning feedback, it means you're getting feedback about what you're doing well, about what you need to improve on. And as a result, that feedback, you can then use that information to invest in improving the skills that you have, the competencies that you have, and your ability to be able to get the results that you want. So I really do think that winning feedback is a super approach, a super way of thinking about feedback in general. And there's 4 steps that I suggest people go through mentally in their mind whenever they get feedback. The first one is to accept the feedback. And why I say accept is because one of the, I suppose, biggest challenges that we can have is that whenever we get feedback, it can be very easy for us to react immediately with a defense. So someone gives us feedback and we're immediately on the defense. And when we're on the defense, it can be very quick for us to reject the feedback. And we can reject it for a multitude of reasons. One of them being, oh, they always wanted to give me this feedback. They always wanted to say this. They're not someone to listen to. They're not someone that has any value whatsoever. And as a result of that, we don't even hear the feedback itself. Accepting it in this context means taking it in and valuing it and listening to it. And the next step then is aligning with what you do agree with. So look into it and go, which parts of this do I agree with? Not do I agree with this, and creating this sort of binary way of thinking about feedback, but what part of this is there a grain of truth to you? And so start to look to align with whatever part of the feedback you do agree with. If you feel that really you're looking for the part that you agree with, but you don't agree with any of it, be clear of that as well. But really try to find whatever parts of it you actually agree with. Then aspire to being able to implement this feedback, identify what you want to achieve as a result of implementing the feedback. And finally, apply the learning, apply the feedback, figure out what is it that I can do in order for me to immediately apply this moving forward. And this all happens in your head. This is all about what you do inside your mind as you get feedback. So you're immediately aware of hearing the feedback, you accept it. As a result of that, you then align with what you agree with, you aspire to what you want to achieve with it, and then you apply it moving forward. There are 4 key steps that will help you to think differently about feedback, let's say. So what is it that will happen inside our head whenever we get feedback? What are all the things we have to watch out for that could interfere with our capacity to take feedback on effectively? Well, first of all, we have biases. And these biases might be our confirmation bias, where we look for evidence to prove our conclusions are true, or we dismiss evidence that contradicts it. And it could also be overconfidence bias. We think we're so good at something, and therefore we ignore what other people have to say. We diminish or dismiss other people's perspective because of what we call the horns effect, where we don't value them very much. And we start to, because they have a difference than us in some way, or there's something about them we don't like, immediately we dismiss everything that comes out of their mouth. So there's all sorts of different things that could help affect or impact the way in which we take feedback from others. The next part is projections. And projections are really when we project onto someone else the negative reasons that we have for giving people feedback. So, for example, we feel insecure. It can be very easy for us to project that insecurity to others, to start to assume that the reason people gave feedback to us was from a bad place, whereas in reality, it might not necessarily have been. Oftentimes, we have emotions that immediately take over. So because we feel embarrassed, because we're feeling insecure, because we feel the sense of imposter phenomena, as it's known, as a result of that, our feelings tend to dictate how we reject the feedback we're getting, and we start to feel defensive, or we allow any bit of negative feedback to completely destroy our confidence. And as a result, we're like, oh, they ruined my confidence. Well, actually, they didn't ruin it. We allowed the feedback to blow up in our mind. And as a result of that, we are now experiencing a massive loss of confidence. But that, again, is something that we did based upon taking their feedback and blowing it up in the way in which we thought about it. So it could be our emotions, it could be biases, it could be projections, and it also could be this notion of us versus them mentality, a very binary way of thinking where it's either this or this. And when we fall into the trap of binary feedback, it means we really aren't aligning with feedback because we're not looking for what out of what they've said do we agree with. We're just thinking, do we or don't we? And that can be very disadvantageous because it means that we're missing out on nuances that might help us to be able to get better or improve in some way. So we have to look at the source of the feedback that is communicating it to us. We have to look at who are the people that are giving us feedback, because that will help us understand to what degree they might be an appropriate authority for us to listen to. And so one of the things we need to understand, is there something that we might have a blind spot over? So we might regard ourselves as an expert in some way. However, there might be something that we're taking for granted, something that we're not seeing. And even if a person doesn't have a great form of authority, maybe they're noticing it. So for example, if you create this wonderful blog post or wonderful essay and you put it out there into the internet and people give you feedback on it, maybe someone will notice a grammatical error. Maybe someone will notice a mistake that you made. And they might not be an expert. They might not be an English teacher. They might not be a wonderful, incredible writer themselves. However, they noticed it. And that means that sometimes it's important for us to be open to feedback from all sources, because it could be a blind spot that we have. It's also important for us to understand what credentials someone does have when they're delivering more specific feedback. Whenever they're able to provide us with feedback, that is beneficial or useful, we need to be able to ask ourselves, what qualifications do they have to do this? Now, there's two types of feedback that we might get. One is feedback that comes from an authority that suggests to us what we need to improve on because they know what they're talking about. And what I'm saying when I say false authority is people masquerading as this when actually they've never really been in the theater. They've never actually been in the zone. They've never been in the field like we are. But there's also types of feedback where you get it from your customers or clients or fans, people or followers, people who necessarily aren't experts, but they have opinions that are nonetheless valid. And so once again, if they're delivering feedback about what would be beneficial for them or what their experience was in trying, let's say, to apply something that you shared, we don't discount them because they're not qualified. Instead, we have to listen to those pieces of feedback as well, because once again, they can tell us certain things that we might be missing. So you see, when we're looking at the source of feedback, it's not that you just go, I'm only listening to people who are like this, but you might only listen to certain types of feedback from certain types of people. And you have to yourself be clear about who and what you're going to listen to. You also want to ask the following two questions. Is it specific and is it useful? And generally, most of the time, it won't be very useful unless it's specific. But you want to know, is it accurate? Is it useful? Is it specific? And by doing so, then it can qualify as effective feedback for you to use and leverage moving forward. So once again, thinking through it like this will make it a lot easier for you to be able to deal with it effectively. And then the other thing to mention is how to respond when people actually give you feedback. So when someone turns around to you and says, I want to give you feedback today, how do you respond in the best possible way to make them feel good about the interaction or experience? Well, first of all, you want to appreciate the fact that they came to you with feedback. So I appreciate it. Thank you for the feedback. You thank them. Second of all, you want to acknowledge what they've said in terms of what you align with. So again, just like you've accepted it, you appreciate it out loud. Just like you align with it, you acknowledge the part that you agree with. You ask them for more specific information about what their advice might be. You then set an aim of what you want to be able to accomplish as a result, and then you action it, you apply it in the real world. And by doing so, it means you develop a sort of a habit of responding positively, which in turn will make other people more likely to deliver feedback to you. And then in terms of moving forward, one of the most useful ways to succeed with feedback is to be able to get all of the questions asked right when you're in a situation where you're expecting feedback. And so what that means is you're looking to figure out what is the feedback that you're getting? Why is it that you got that feedback? How specifically can you apply it? And why is it important for you to apply it? When and where do you need to apply it? So you're getting specifics on the how, the when, and the where so that you can do it. When you're successfully applying it, what could stop you potentially? And you're thinking about any scenario that might stop you in the future from applying the feedback that you're getting right now. How will you handle those challenges that might impede your ability to be able to handle that feedback and incorporate it? And then how will you keep yourself accountable moving forward? When you start to ask these questions about what is the feedback? Why is it important for you to make these changes? How can you make these changes? When and where can you make these changes? How will you know you're doing this? So all of these questions are benefiting you in the sense that they're assisting you to be able to use and invest really that feedback in the future actions that you take and the future ways in which you apply the skills that you've been learning. So I want to just finish on one other topic, and that is what happens when you get like negative criticism. And I might do another episode on just handling criticism as opposed to feedback, because criticism is really when feedback comes from a bad place. So what happens when you feel that feedback is coming from a bad place? Well, the first question to ask yourself is, what is there still to learn from the feedback that you're getting? So when you're getting, even if you disagree with the feedback and you think that the feedback is totally wrong, totally inaccurate, and purely driven by the other person's desire to make you feel bad, ask yourself, out of the feedback they've given, is there anything that you can learn from that? And if there is, write it down. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to extract from the negative things that people say, anything that might be useful for you moving forward. And then you apply that learning or lesson, not because of them, but because you want to apply whatever can help you to get better. So the first thing you do is ask yourself, is there anything that could be helpful or useful in what they've said? Once you've done that, then the next step is to be able to change the way you think about it, and then to be able to make it so that you respond accordingly. Now, my best approach in terms of responding accordingly is just to ignore. Sometimes I'll hide, if it's online, I'll hide the comment from my page. If it's in an email and I feel it's just an attack, then I'll usually either delete the email, block the user, block the sender. I'll usually, if it's online and it's a public forum, again, if I'm convinced that it's coming from a bad place, I'll hide their comment or I'll delete their comment, and then I'll ban them from the page. That's generally the way in which I work. And trust me, I get plenty. I mean, I'm not saying I get them regularly all the time, but I've gotten plenty over my career in terms of people saying things. I've had people conjure up images of who they think I am and then attack that person. And I felt sorry for that person that they were attacking, but it wasn't me, right? It was somebody that it had my name. I'm sure it had my face, but they were convinced that I was this other person that was very, very far from who I actually am. And these people didn't know me. But once again, what I needed to do in that situation, it didn't mean that it didn't frustrate me or piss me off at the time. But what I needed to do in that moment was I needed to be able to get myself to the place where I wasn't negatively impacted by it. So I first asked the question, is there anything I can learn from this? And then once I'd done that, the next thing I did was look for what is it that I need to be able to do moving forward? How can I benefit from this moving forward? And that allowed me to do so. And then finally, it's what is it that you can do inside your mind that allows you to be able to move on from it? So what you really want to be able to do is you want to figure out what is it that they're trying to do there and really unpack their intentions. They really are angry with you and they want to put you down. They want to make you feel bad. Why? Well, generally, most of the time, I'd argue, it really comes down to someone being massively hurt. So someone is very hurt. They feel very bad about themselves. Maybe it's insecurity. Maybe it's just they feel a sense of loathing for their own life. Maybe they're projecting a bunch of stuff onto you, but they're going through stuff. And whenever you think of that, number one, it takes the sting off the feedback. And number two, maybe it can help trigger a bit of compassion so that when you think of them, you no longer feel that sense of negative response. And so what I try to do, even when I ignore people and when I hide their comment or delete their comment or remove them from the page, what I'm trying to do is find compassion for them, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and trying to accept that they're struggling. And as a result of that, I'm just collateral damage in their own battle with themselves. And I think that's often useful for us to be able to do in the work that we do every day. So I hope you found that useful. And I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this episode or session helpful. I know I gave you a lot of stuff to think about, but please do take it, use it, apply it, and maybe it'll help you to change the way you believe feedback can impact you. And maybe you'll be able to incorporate the feedback in a much more effective way. For now, take care. Until the next time, may you continue to feel good. May the force continue to be with you, and may you continue to believe better. Bye for now. You've been listening to the Changing Minds podcast. It's now time to recruit some more people into this cult. You can do so by subscribing to the podcast, rate and review it only if you liked it, and share it with your friends, dogs, pet iguanas, and even people you don't like. Keep well, and may you continue to believe better.